those who have provided stewardship over the years, and their names are printed outside on the poster. We also wanted to honor the faculty, the staff, the students who, both in a contemporary sense, but also in the past, who have used this collection. I like to say that this collection is the laboratory to the humanities. It gives students the opportunity to have firsthand experiences with some of the finest pieces and treasures that we have in the United States and indeed the world. And we do something that's different than most institutions, as you know. We allow undergraduates and graduate students to touch and to feel and not have to present 15 levels of credentials in order to gain access to it. But more importantly, we have a staff that works closely with the faculty to tailor it and curate it so it is very, very special experience for those who have an opportunity to interface with it. And the fourth thing that we wanted to do, which is most importantly, is we wanted to ensure that this particular collection remains a legacy for future generations of Miamians. That we take what we do here seriously, and most importantly, we do it with the kindness and the generosity of the spirit of our staff. So those in special collections, we have Bill Madro, who's the current director of our special collections and archives. We have Rachel Makrovsky, who is our curator. We have Masha Stepanova, who is our Slavic librarian, cataloger, Slavic librarian. We have Jackie Johnson, who's the university archivist. We have Eric Harrelson, who is our preservation conservationist. And we have Aaliyah Wagner. We have Aaliyah Wagner, who's our digital librarian. As soon as I said, I'm missing, then I saw you. Anyone else? Candace. And Candace Pine, who's our rare book and manuscript. And that position, we started with that position with the goal of having additional staff to curate and to catalog all the manuscripts that we had in that special collection. I'm going to turn this over now to an individual who has been literally the book of Miami University, fourth book of Miami history, and he's sitting over there like Phil Donahue. So I'm going to turn it over to Phil, otherwise known as Dr. Kurt Ellison, Dean Emeritus of this program. But Kurt, before you start, I'm going to say something also. There was a committee that worked very hard to put this on today, and I would be remiss if I did not thank them. Aaron Shrimpman, who's our Senior Associate Dean. We also have Bill Madro, which we mentioned before. Celia Ellison came in to pinch hit for us. That was one of the best decisions we had. Celia came back. As many of you know, she's a legend here at Miami, and she's in my own mind, yes, right? We have Nick Kinnear, who's our communications manager. We have Mike Smith, who's our facility manager. Donna Richardson, who's in my staff, Heather Bennett as well. And we also have members of our alumni advisory board here today. Thank them, as well as students and our student advisory board in the back. So thank you very much for all of them. Kurt, the floor is yours, my friend.
And thank you, Jerome, for your good work. So, can everyone hear me all right? One moment.
Glad we practiced.
Now?
Yes, sir.
Yep. You can hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, good. So, as Jerome said, this year we're celebrating the golden anniversary of the naming of the Walter Havighurst Special Collections in the University Archives.
Talk louder, please.
Check the green light.
How about this? Is that better? Okay, hi, I'm Kurt Ellison, and this year the university is celebrating the golden anniversary of the naming of the Havighurst Special Collections in the University Archives. And this afternoon, we're really pleased to showcase the partnership of Special Collections and Archives with Miami faculty, Miami staff, and community institutions, both to enrich teaching and to better inform the general public. So you're going to hear about some very highly notable projects today. We're grateful to all our presenters who are named here for their fine work and for sharing it with us. The first part of our program will feature 4 people who will speak in turn about their engagement with special collections and archives. They are Stephen Norris, Walter E. Havighurst Professor of History and Director of the Havighurst Center for Russian and Post-Soviet Studies, Jasmine Sutton, Assistant Professor of African American History, Brenda Dales, Professor Emerita of Teacher Education, and Valerie Elliott, Manager Emerita of the Smith Library of Regional History of the Lane Public Libraries here in Oxford. After they present, we'll have time for comments and questions. And then we'll take a 5-minute break. We'll reconvene after 5 minutes. The second half of the program will feature Helen Shoemaker, teaching professor, history and global and intercultural studies, Nathan French, associate professor of comparative religion, Dr. Cameron Shriver, the authentic and real Dr. Shriver, senior research associate of the Miami Center, and me, Kurt Ellison. I'm Professor Emeritus of History and American Studies. When that's done, we'll have more time for comments and questions, and that will be followed by a reception and further conversation. Today's program is being recorded for YouTube, and Bill Mockrow will bring this microphone to anyone who wants to speak during the comments periods. And as you've already seen, you should speak directly into it. Let's begin with Steve Norris. Steve?
Thank you, Kurt. Thank you, Jerome. I typically don't like putting all my official titles on a screen, but I thought maybe on this occasion I should. As Kurt said, I'm the Walter E. Havighurst Professor of Russian History and the Director of the Havighurst Center for Russian and Post-Soviet Studies, here to talk on the 50th anniversary of the Havighurst Special Collections. I realize now I was probably asked to go first, not because of my charm and good looks, but because I have the word Havighurst twice in my titles. I'm also here to talk about, or mainly here to talk about, the remarkable collaboration over the years between the Havighurst Center for Russian and Post-Soviet Studies and Havighurst Special Collections. Here on this slide you see some of the things we've done, even recent things, including most recently the beginnings of an online project that digitizes nearly 3,000 photographs taken on the Maidan Square during the Maidan Revolution of 2013 and 2014 by our former teaching fellow, Emily Channel Justice, who was just here a couple weeks ago to talk about the 10th anniversary of the Maidan Revolution. And Aaliyah Wagner has helped tremendously bringing this to the library. You see that now some of the photographs are in the digital collections officially, and we have an accompanying website that will be built over the years. The Havighurst Center has also helped partner with the library to purchase a number of online databases, including the English language newspaper published in the Soviet Union from 1932 till 2014. Soviet Union didn't exist, of course, when it ceased publishing. And it's a really amazing resource for students because it allows them to read in English translated articles from Soviet publications. It was a highly propagandistic newspaper until about 1985 and 86 during the Gorbachev years when it became anything but. So it's a great resource. We also have a number of posters that you see here that one can touch and look at. And then some really, really rare items that's part of the crown jewel, at least in my view, of the special collections here. The Andrei de Santra collection of Russian materials. There's about 4,000 objects in the Andrei de Santra collection, and a few hundred of them even are unique only to Miami University, including what you see at the bottom of the slide, the only existing physical copy of one of the Russian Futurist manifestos published in the early 20th century. As Jerome said, the Special Collections is a lab of sorts for historians and humanists in general, and in my mind, the remarkable de Santra collection is the best part of this lab. In part because it also allows me to work with the even more remarkable Masha Stepanova, who's the Slavic bibliographer here. My single favorite item in this 4,000 object collection is Yuri Annenkoff's 17 portraits. Students tend to agree, I think, looking at this item. Maybe the Coronation album of Nicholas II is a close second. They're actually both located on the back table. We're going to talk a lot about this today, the time I have. But you can also take a look at the Coronation album of Nicholas II from 1896. Annenkoff was a prominent artist in the Russian Silver Age and post-revolutionary early Soviet era. At the time that this book was commissioned, 1924, and published in 1926, the big debate in Soviet culture was whether or not revolutionary culture should be revolutionary in form, that is, take the form of non-rhyming poetry or dissonant sound or non-realistic art, or revolutionary in content, that is, be fairly accessible to a wide set of the population, but have a clear pro-Soviet revolutionary message. Anniv was in the former camp. He thought art should be revolutionary in form and could therefore still carry revolutionary content. In 1924, the year of Lenin's death, Yuri Annikov, as artist, received an incredible commission at the time to draw portraits of the most important Soviet leaders at that time. There were 17 portraits. There are 2 Trotskys, there are 4 Zinovievs, 1 Kamenev, 1 Antonov Ovsienko, who actually led the capture of the Winter Palace in 1917, 1 Karl Redak, Mravlov, who was a farmer turned Bolshevik and a friend of Trotsky's, Zolf, who was a prominent politician at the time, Inukidze, who was a Georgian communist, Vyacheslav Meyerhold, who was also a revolutionary theater director and kind of, with Annenkov, believed that revolutionary culture should be revolutionary in form. There's also Sklyansky, Trotsky's secretary. In many ways, these portraits that you see here reflect the 2 years that Annenkov spent working on the project. Leon Trotsky in 1924 to 1926 was easily the most recognizable Bolshevik leader after Lenin and was part of the coalition government that was ruling the Soviet Union after Lenin's death in January 1924. And Zinoviev and Kamenev were also prominent so-called old Bolsheviks who had worked with Lenin the longest and were very visible, very well-known figures in the early Soviet Union. But by the time the book came out, the political winds had shifted. So commissioned in 1924, the year of Lenin's death, came out in 1926. And by 1926, Joseph Stalin had maneuvered enough behind the scenes to establish his own power base, and even succeeded in 1925 in having Trotsky removed from the party for the first time. And within 2 years of the publication of this book, Stalin had, of course, established his own personal dictatorship. Now, careful viewers, I know all of you are careful viewers, and you all like counting. You might have noticed that this slide only has 14 of the 17 portraits. The reason why is because all of the men you see here were later executed in the purges that Stalin orchestrated in the late 1930s. All of them executed because of Stalin's orders, or in Trotsky's case, assassinated in 1940 in Mexico City. Only 3 of the 17 people depicted in the book survived, and only 1 really survived without rumor accompanying him of having died because of some nefarious means. So the 3 you see here is Anatoly Lunacharsky, on the left, who is the cultural minister of the Soviet Union, who actually wrote the introduction to this book. He died of a heart attack in 1933 en route to become, from the Soviet Union to Spain to become the Soviet ambassador to Spain. He was only 58 years old when he died. There's still lots of rumors about maybe he'd been poisoned and died on the way. Stalin got rid of him that way. M.N. Roy, the Indian communist, also died of a heart attack in 1954, also mysterious circumstances back in India. Only the most ardent Stalinist of the bunch, Clement Voroshilov, who looks like a Hollywood movie star, died of natural causes at the age of 88 in 1969. By the time the book appeared, the style that Annenkov preferred, revolutionary in form, was also on the way out. He fled to France. He received his copies of the books there via diplomatic pouch. And because of the style and the content, I mean, you may also notice, 1924, Annenkov gets this commission, decides at that time Joseph Stalin isn't worthy of being one of the 17 portraits and 17 portraits. So by the time it came out, by the time all this happened, by the time Annenkov had fled to France and gotten his books, Stalin began ordering the removal of these books, 2,000 printed total, destroyed, taken from libraries, removed from personal shelves. You were then asked eventually to remove only Voroshilov, that is the ardent Hollywood-style movie star here, the one Stalinist in the book. You could keep him, the rest were dangerous. The book was therefore purged along with the people in it. And the copy you have here, the reason I like talking about it so much, the one you can touch later if you like to see just how beautiful it is, was one of the copies Annenkov himself received in France. We know that because it has his personal bookplate in it. So it's one of the only existing complete copies of this book. We have it here at Lime University, it's right on the table, and you can't touch it. Jerome was right. So thus our lab, the Special Collections, preserves the past and all its wonders here in the form of a dangerous, beautiful book that perfectly captures an important moment and important shifts in Soviet history. One of the great pleasures I have in working as director of the Havighurst Center is we get to bring in a lot of really prominent scholars, a lot of prominent people to speak. And when we have time, we always bring them to special collections to meet with Masha. They're always dazzled by this collection. So about 4 years ago, we had Mikhail Zidar, who's one of the most important Russian journalists and popular historians working today. He wrote what I think is the single best book about Putinism, All the Kremlin's Men. He wrote a book about the revolutionary period. He just published a book about the war that Putin has launched on Ukraine. He has fled to Germany now. Anyway, he came here and he visited, and he too was taken with the 17 portraits among all the items in this library, because for him it existed up until the moment he came here mostly as a myth, a thing that didn't exist, that couldn't be touched, an unattainable object. But here, right in the room adjacent to us, he could touch it for the first time in his life, take pictures of it, and share it on social media to his thousands and thousands of fans. So you too, in other words, can touch this as well at the end, look at it, gaze at it, think about the remarkable, dangerous, beautiful history it contains. Thank you.
I'm going to see if I can use the clicker. If not, I'm going to use the mouse right here. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dr. Jasmine Sutton, and I'm a professor of African American history in the Department of History. And today I'm going to be talking about the Jenny Elder Sewell collection. Miami University created the Distinguished Woman of Color Award to recognize the spirited, warm, and welcoming work of Jenny Elder Sewell. The Oxford community remembers Mrs. Sewell as a volunteer who provided housing, meals, and entertainment for Black students at Miami. A local newspaper article claims, quote, "Determination and courage seem a way of life for this remarkable woman," and historical records suggest the same. In 1993, 89-year-old Jenny Elder Sewell, a local African-American woman in Oxford, donated a collection of personal and family documents to Miami University Library. Her home-based archive preserved 2 centuries of African-American history, including bills of sales for enslaved children, freedom certificates from Virginia, photographs depicting Jenny Elder Sewell's career as one of the first African-American nurses in the country, organizational memos, newspaper articles, and a letter from a teenage Black girl seeking and then being denied entrance to the university in 1910 based on her race. During the spring of 2022, with the assistance of archivist Jackie Johnson, the students in my Black Women in America course set out to uncover more about Jenny Elder Sewell. In general, the course examined the historical experiences of Black women in the United States from slavery to the present. However, every major assignment in the class was related to Jenny Elder Sewell's collection, including a timeline, a document analysis, an unessay, and collaborative in-class research. The unessay in particular was a memorialization of Sewell's life and required students to draw creative inspiration from her collection. I want to share with you all a few of those examples and how my students executed that project. So a few students chose to create children's books. This is one such example. Others chose to memorialize Jenny Elder Sewell through artwork. And here is one more piece of artwork that uses digital technologies.
I will rise 1,000 times again. And we'll rise up. I like the waves will rise up in spite of the
And 3 students chose to use music to analyze and give meaning to the documents in Sewell's collection. I'm going to play one snippet from a student named Riley. By the way, She was not a rapper, but she chose to create a rap. And I was so happy that this assignment had pushed her out of her comfort zone. So I just wanted to share that with you all before I play her music, and I do have permission to play it.
Oxford Spires was running in the 5-star black student hotel. We don't know about the tears through the years or the times that she felt most of these. Did her smoke demonstrate whack people thinking they could walk away scotch-free? It's just some family blue hammer type shit. You wouldn't believe this heroin you all done missed. Cover planting the seeds in her mind, so heavily these silences we mind. Her right hand extended horizontally, who was the mother of the sun in the tree. I'm so spoken, I can do. Woman I want to be, woman Jenny so free. You see, usually I don't talk so heavily. Reality and trauma in place of a memory. Tell us maybe what you think can happen, you and me. They were not slaves, but the girls are held to be. Audrey Lorde says there won't be an apology. Although Dr. Danny says we live more than we. I wonder if Joan soaked in all the cheese before she was laid down and pronounced disease.
And so before I move on, I want to give you a little bit of more context to the lyrics. So the title comes from a story Sewell shares with a local reporter about keeping a cut-off pool cue in her kitchen to arm herself against intruders. Riley situates this in the context of what historian Kelly Carter Jackson calls protective violence, Black women's employment of force to protect themselves and their communities. The mention of Carver is referring to the George Washington Carver, the agricultural scientist and inventor largely known for the products he made with peanuts. Carver was one of Sewell's instructors at Tuskegee University. When Riley poses the question, who was the mother in the tree, in the first verse, she is shedding light on the lynching Sewell witnessed when she arrived in Alabama. Riley is referencing Audrey Lorde's essay, The Uses of Anger, Nanny McLean's book, We Live for the We, and questioning the intergenerational transfer of knowledge from Sewell to her adopted daughter, Joan. As a historian of African American women's history in the Midwest, I know firsthand how rare it is to come across a collection this extensive. And by extensive, I'm referring to the time periods and topics the documents cover, the quality, not the quantity of those documents. Historically, Black women have often chosen to keep their historical documents within their families due to a lack of trust in predominantly white institutions. But that was not the case for Jenny Elder Sewell. She donated her collection to Miami at the request of her grandmother-in-law, Nan Sewell. Nan Sewell was a Black woman born in 1825, North Carolina, during the period of enslavement. A local Oxford resident in her adult years, Nance recognized the importance of Miami University housing documents that highlight the tough questions our nation continues to debate about. Whose history matters and whose doesn't? Whose life matters and whose doesn't? These are not new conversations though, and Nance had to know this, yet she chose Miami, the institution that her family members labored at in domestic service roles, the institution that did not allow Black students to live or eat on campus in her lifetime, which is why Jenny Elder Sewell and her husband Clifford opened their homes to them. And finally, the same institution that in the 1960s forced Black students to walk out of class and stage a protest, demanding that the university hire a Black professor to teach African American history in the history department. While Sewell's collection is valuable in revealing those issues, her own words, thoughts, and feelings appear seldomly in the records. I'd like to leave you all with two of those quotes. According to Sewell, when African American students in the 1960s would arrive at her house, furious about the discrimination they were encountering at Miami, she would say, quote, "Let's have a quiet hour. Let's get the Bible, let's read some passages, and think quietly and see how you feel then." She went on to say, quote, "I've learned in all my years that you are responsible for your own actions. You make the decision within yourself whether to love or hate," end quote. And last but not least, she revealed, and I quote, "People ask me, how should we classify you?" As she had African American, Native American, and Irish ancestry. To which she would respond, "American citizen." Jenny Elder Sewell was an American citizen, a Tuskegee graduate, a campus nurse, and a preschool caregiver, a local icon to one reporter, and an Oxford treasure, in my opinion. Her collection isn't just Black women's history, it's Oxford's history, it's Miami's history, it's American history. And so next semester, the students in my Black Women in America class will continue to look at the historical significance of Jenny Elder Sewell through the creation of an open access digital archive, as well as oral histories conducted by other African American women in the local community. Thank you.
Brent.
Thank you. Is this on? Okay, is this better? All right, thank you. As someone who is an alum of Miami University and who also taught here, I have many wonderful experiences in the Havighurst Special Collections and Archives. There we go. One of my most influential professors here at Miami was Dr. Eileen Tway. She was well known in the field of children's literature. And the Children's Literature Collection on the ground floor in the Instructional Materials Center is named for her. And you can see this book plate in all of the children's books downstairs if you'd like to. She was friends with Dr. Havighurst. I believe they knew each other well. And I even got to speak with Dr. Havighurst on the phone one time because of Eileen Tway. What's wrong? Yeah, wrong way. There we go. So I was introduced to the Edgar and Faith King Juvenile Collection when I was a graduate student in Dr. Tway's class. And at that time, the head of the Havighurst was Helen Ball, who was the first head of the Havighurst. And Eileen would always bring her classes up to the Havighurst, and I was just enthralled and mesmerized when I met Helen Ball and was introduced to this collection. There we go. The right way this time. Dr. Havighurst, who wrote many books, also wrote books. He wrote many books for adults, but he also wrote books for young people as well. And this is just a sample. When I first started in education, his books were still being used in the public schools. And he also co-authored books with his wife, Marion Havighurst. So this one, Song of the Pines, they co-authored and received a Newbery honor. The Newbery Medal is given by the Association for Library Service to Children, which is a division of the American Library Association, to the author of the most distinguished children's book for young people of that year, the previous year. So to receive a Newbery honor is very outstanding. And this book is on the table back there, the Song of the Pines, if you'd like to see it, as well as one of another of Dr. Havighurst's books. When I would bring my students up here, or when I came up here, it was always, exciting to see a lot of books that we read about in textbooks, but we couldn't find them in libraries, or they were no longer in print. And Millions of Cats is considered the first true U.S. picture storybook. And we have an original one here in the Havighurst. It's still in print, but to be able to see and touch one of the originals was really exciting. And then also we have some books with original art by Randolph Caldecott. The Association for Library Service to Children, or ALS, after they began the Newbery Medal, decided that they also wanted to give recognition to the person who the best illustrator of a children's book, a picture book. So Randolph Caldecott, who was a British illustrator, he was chosen as the namesake. And by the way, Randolph Caldecott is actually his final resting place. Even though he's British, his final resting place is in St. Augustine, Florida. So these are just some of the amazing books that we have here. We also have books from the first golden age of children's literature, a lot of British books, and just to see how the illustrations were actually put in those books. The first golden age was from about the 1860s to around the beginning of the First World War. So the printing and publishing was a little bit different back then. So there are a lot of the book arts up here as well. Another one of the book arts that you can see here is books with 4-edge paintings. And there's one on the table back there. It's the red book because when it's closed, you won't recognize it as a book with a 4-edge painting. But the heads of special collections would always get out some of the treasures for me and my students to look at. And my students always just were amazed and loved the 4-edge paintings. When the book is closed, it just looks like a book with gold around the edges. But when you open it, you see the painting on the side. And we even have a double 4-edge. So if you open it in the middle, there's a painting on both edges of the book. So again, a lot of stuff about the book arts as well. At one point, I got involved in pop-up books. I was doing some research for an article I was writing. They're often considered toy books, but I realized they're much more than that because you have a writer who has to be creative with writing because with all the folds of paper, the book tends to get thick. And so you have to figure out, how am I going to get the text in there? How am I going to get the words in there? And then, of course, there's an illustrator and a paper engineer, which involves geometry and math. So I thought this would be a good summer workshop for teachers. So I was assigned, unfortunately, to the Hamilton campus to deliver this workshop. So how could we couldn't just like walk up here to the library to see these pop-up books that we have here in the Havighurst collection. So I think Janet Stuckey was the head of Havighurst at that time. And she arranged for the books to come to us. And so I think Betsy Butler, who was one of the assistants at that time, brought an assortment of the pop-up books down to us. And this is a reproduction of Meggendorfer. Lothar Meggendorfer was one of the early German paper engineers. And we have one of his original books here. And then, of course, the pop-up Mickey Mouse, and then also additional pop-up books by some of the current pop-up paper engineers, such as Robert Sabuda. And I contribute, that was a successful workshop, and I contribute this success to the Havighurst. In the year 2012, I was very fortunate to be involved in hosting the Arbuthnot Lecture here at Miami University. It is also something that the Association for Library Service to Children of the American Library Association, it's one of their projects. They choose every year someone who is prominent in the field of children's literature, and then different institutions can host that lecture. It's now called the Children's Literature Award. So I was very interested in Peter Seiss. He's one of my favorite author illustrators. He was born and raised in the former Czechoslovakia. He now lives in New York. And so I was just thrilled when ALSC chose Miami University. This was held in Hall Auditorium. We packed Hall Auditorium for this lecture, but we also had to have a reception and a book signing. So where to have that? Havighurst to the rescue. And Elizabeth Bryce was the head at that time. I don't know if she knew what she was really getting into, but she really supported this. And so you can see some pictures there in the middle. There's Peter Seiss signing. The top photo is people who wanted to speak with Peter Seiss or get a book signed, and that was in the library room here in the Havighurst. And you can see that people were lined up. The refreshments were in this room, and people were lined up going into the exhibition room where there was an exhibit related to Peter Seiss's work that Masha Stepanova had put together. And the lines went out into the third floor up here at King and snaked around. And I don't think we were finished up here until after 11 o'clock at night. And Elizabeth was very kind to keep the Havighurst open for us that evening for this special event. In the spring of the year 2018, the Art Museum here on campus had a special exhibition of original children's picture book art that was created by African Americans and featured African Americans. Because I taught children's literature, I was invited to participate in the committee that organized this exhibition. The earliest piece of art that we had in the exhibition was from John Steptoe's Stevie, which was published in 1969. And then, of course, we had a lot of newer pieces as well. So why did we not have anything older than 1969? Well, the traditional publishers at that time were not publishing minorities, authors, and illustrators in children's books. So I also had the opportunity to teach a class actually in the Art Museum related to that exhibition. So I wanted my students to see, or to get some ideas of what was being published about African Americans in children's literature earlier in that century. So Bill Madro and I came up with some ideas for some books, and one of them is Journey Cake. I'll just mention one of them as an example. This was published in 1942, and it was written by Isabel McMeekin, and it's not a picture book. It has about 213 pages of text, but it has some drawings, some illustrations by Nicholas Panizas. And in brief, one of the characters is Juba, who was formerly enslaved, an African-American woman who was formerly enslaved. The story is about a white family in North Carolina that's moving to Kentucky, and the father is already in Kentucky, and the white mother passes away. So Juba takes care of the white children. At that time, in the 1940s, the book review in the New York Times spoke of Juba and said, "The loyalty and courage is a tribute to all Negro nurses," and I think they meant caretakers or nannies at that time. So this seems to be a book that was written from the white perspective about African Americans, what they think African Americans might be like. Fortunately, we've moved beyond that now, and we are looking for books that are, own voices, and we need diverse books, and we're representing all minorities now. We still have a ways to go, but that was what it was like before, 1969 and earlier parts of this country, what was being published. Also, for my students in that class in the Art Museum, we also looked at Brownie's book, which was the first magazine published for African American children, and I have a little inset of one of the issues there. We have back here on the table some excerpts from the Brownie's book. It's a bound volume, which you see in the slide here. So we do have that also. It was only published from about 1920 to 1921 in this country during the Harlem Renaissance, but it stopped publication due to the Depression. And also we got to listen to Sharon Draper. Sharon Draper had been a teacher in the Cincinnati Public Schools at Walnut Hills. She was a National Teacher of the Year, and she started writing, and she is phenomenal with her writing. There's just a sample of some of her books. She's received many awards from the Coretta Scott King and numerous awarding bodies, and she, the Havighurst and the Art Museum partnered. So Sharon Draper got to come to my class and speak to my students, and then she also spoke right here in this room to the university and everybody else who wanted to attend that meeting. So I really appreciated that partnership between the Havighurst and the Art Museum. I could go on and talk about children's books because that's what I do, but my time is up. So if you would like to contact me or speak with me about children's books, don't hesitate to contact me. I've been on the Caldecott Committee, and I am currently on the jury for the International Hans Christian Andersen Award. So please feel free to contact me, and I would also give my heartfelt thanks to all the staff and everyone who I've met who has worked in the Havighurst collection. Thank you very much.
I'm Valerie Edwards-Elliott, and I'm fairly certain that I'm the only person on the panel today who was here 50 years ago when the Havighurst name was added.
A little closer to your.
At the time, I was a sophomore history major working as a part-time library assistant right here in King Library. But since then, I spent 32 years of my 45-year library career at the Smith Library of Regional History here in Oxford, part of the public library system. And first I need to point out that during my time, most of my years at Smith Library, Special Collections, Miami Archives, and Western Archives were all separately housed in different buildings on the Oxford campus. I'm not speaking as to how they were administered, but I always worked with a different staff person who had a different collection in a different location. Starting with Special Collections in King Library, I will share just a few examples of collaborative efforts. One time, Smith Library partnered with the Friends of Miami Libraries to bring in a guest speaker to talk about her new book on Ohio's Carnegie Libraries. The plan was to hold the public program in the local Carnegie Library, known today as Alumni Hall. But that rainy evening, Alumni Hall flooded. I'm not kidding. It was Special Collections that came to the rescue by offering its space, for which I was very grateful. Another example of working together was the time the Smith Library and Special Collections assisted a Hamilton committee by providing historical material for its William Dean Howells driving tour. Before Smith Library, from time to time, Special Collections donated materials to Smith Library that were a better fit for our collection and theirs. And two examples are shown here: a mill photograph and an item from a family file. Smith Library tried to reciprocate by donating items or even steering potential donors their way for subjects that we didn't collect, like picture postcards and juvenile literature. Before Smith Library was established in 1981, there was no repository for rare books, manuscripts, or archival materials in any public library in this area, so Miami ended up with some of those that didn't necessarily fit their later collection parameters, and you've seen just a few of those now. In cases where materials weren't transferred outright to Smith Library, copies were made, like 19th century church records, for example. In one case, one of our library users at Smith Library had spent months and months trying to locate the records of a pioneer association that had existed from the 1880s to the 1940s, but he had not found them listed in the holdings of any library or any historical society in the 3 counties that these records covered. Luckily, a person at Special Collections was willing to check a stack of unidentified, unprocessed, old leather-bound volumes and discover the missing records. These were scanned for Smith Library and added to the similar ones that were already in our collection. Because Smith Library's mission is to collect, preserve, and disseminate information on the history of the region, publishing is an integral part of that mission. When 2 major bicentennials were approaching, Miami's archivist agreed to write an article for each, and that was to be part of a Smith Library newspaper series throughout the bicentennial year. And these articles were later compiled as books. And I should note that Western's archivist also contributed to this effort. And Miami Archives also donated items that were a better fit for Smith Library's collection, like these Indiana Farm Journals shown here. And we frequently gave each other recensios to fill needs in both collections. But the biggest gift to Smith Library, in physical size anyway, were the two large 1930s murals from an Oxford business. They had been purchased by Miami Alumni Association, but were never hung in Miami, so they ended up rolled up and stored in Miami archives for almost 3 decades. In 2015, they were given to Smith Library and permanently installed near the entrance. Western College Archives wasn't established until the 1990s, so Smith Library helped build their Freedom Summer collection. This included donating copies of photographs taken by a local professional photographer and copies of articles from a newspaper clipping service that documented coverage of the 1964 event from around the country. Western Archives and Smith Library also collaborated on programming. One example is a jointly sponsored program, and we also spoke at each other's programs. And again, when Smith Library's publishing projects needed visual images and information, Western Archives provided them. To the left, the book about people who lived in what is now McGuffey Museum includes numerous photographs from Western Archives. And the third in Smith Library's series of historic district walking tours is filled with pictures and information from Western Archives. In Smith Library's most recent publication, Western Archive provided visual images of 2 houses that were essential in completing the book as we had envisioned it. And because of the way our collections complemented one another, it would not be an exaggeration to say that I probably interacted with librarians in the Miami and Western Archives more frequently than I did with librarians in the Lane Libraries. So thank you, Walter Havighurst Special Collection and Archives.
Thank you, Valerie. I think now we'll take a few moments for questions and comments from members of the audience. So if anybody learned anything that they have a question about, now is your chance to share it.
You gotta raise your hand.
Comments are allowed as well. How about from the members of the panel? Let me ask you this, how many people discovered something in these presentations that you didn't know? Well, that's a good thing. Hey, that's really nice. You don't have to have questions. Oh, I guess there is one. Bill?
Bill, I have a question. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you acquire.
Let him come to you
Sorry.
so that everyone can hear.
I wonder if the, panelists could talk, or the library staff from the collections, talk about how they acquire things. Is it often the result of gifts? Do you have a collection budget where you actually work on acquiring or expanding collections you already have?
What did you think?
Oh, okay, well, questions for the panelists too, in the sense this makes one of the collaborations. Yes, we have an amazing dean who supports all the materials that we look at, and with the hands-on, it's about empowering and engaging students, faculty with the materials, but each one of these, Steve already mentioned, we purchase materials not to enhance our collections, but it enhances the discovery ability, but we also work with the faculty if they need materials for their classes, for their research, and not like I said, do we get the materials and stuff, we digitize if that request is there too, and things like that. So, and we have, like I said, various little pledges, but Jerome has been most generous. The celebration of the 50th, we've tried to find a unique item. Rachel really found a book of poems, Phyllis Wheatley. It's 5 figures, I'm sorry, 7 figures. Yeah, Jerome is very supportive. Yeah, the second bill is coming in. What I'm saying is that it's
Jerome just learned something.
That's right. my salary. No. But the point is this book is like one of the rarest book ideas. They're most unique things out there. You know, other people can have a Civil War diary, but we try to get things that are unique to us with, again, the text, the make of the book, and again, images and things like that. So I went more so than the question was asked, but that's how we build it. We try to build those collections. And we do also have, what I'm going to say stipulate, we have things, money to look for things, children's books, things like that. So it really helps building that collection. Plus we also have a tremendous, Brenda's been donating her books, her children's award-winning books to us, so we're really excited about that.
Kurt,
Yes.
Kurt,
Come on, go with
I
Desmond.
can also speak to something that's unique to what I'm doing with the Jenny Elder Sewell collection.
You can stand up, so you can.
Sorry, Jack.
I can also speak to something that's unique to what I'm doing with the Jenny Elder Sewell collection. And so when we started to do research in class about Sewell that related to things that we could not find in documents, we reached out to individuals who knew her. And so now in her collections are church records from the local Bethel AME church, her obituary, things that we received from members of the community who knew her. So that was one way in which we got more things into her collection. Also, for the essays and the student blogs that my students wrote in my Black Women in America course, we asked for students' permission, and those are going to be added to her collection as well at some point.
There's a question back here.
Yeah. So donations, funding, and again, that's archived and special collected. We're fortunate there.
I'm Joyce Gordon, and when my husband and I came to Oxford, my husband came as head of the chemistry department, and we sort of inherited Walter Havighurst as part of that moving. Walter became a neighbor of ours, and he really helped me a great deal. However, I really realize at this point in time, I may have a few things that never got back to Walter. So if someone wishes,
I will call you tomorrow, Joyce. Bill?
Yes, sir.
I think Bill mentioned this, but I think the most important part of the Havighurst Special Collections has been the donations that alumni and others have given to allow us to be able to purchase wonderful items. We have a number of endowments that Bill mentioned that affords us the opportunity to buy special treats and treasures for the university. But more importantly, what we're trying to do is to have a collection that reflects America. So when Bill mentioned the Phyllis Wheatley, Rachel said, hey, our collection is void in many ways of the whole picture of the American experience. And I think this is what Dr. Sutton was trying to get at as well in terms of some of those missing pieces that are there that we just don't have. And Brenda, Dr. Dales mentioned that we just don't have the historical record. So we're trying our best to collect those things. The person who asked the original question is Carolyn Walter, who's the Dean Emerita of Indiana University's library. So they have, as you know, the Lilly Library over there. So we're trying our best to compete with them. But she will share with you that it's the donations of individuals who have given that makes this so rich and so special. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to step into Kurt's role and give everyone a 5-minute break. But please come back because we have 4 more exciting presentations and we want to try to wrap this thing up by 5 o'clock. So 5 minutes.
Come back in 5 minutes. Ellen, Nathan, Cameron.
And me. Hello.
There we go. So I'm Helen Shoemaker. I've taught at Miami over 20 years. I'm in the history department, in the program in American Studies, and the Department of Global Intercultural Studies. Over the years I've been here, beginning my second semester of meeting Jackie Johnson over at Western College, I have worked with the archives, particularly Miami University archives, doing exactly what it looks like, students immersed with the archival record. I'm going to go over some of the projects I've done over the years. There are more, because I teach a lot. But the first project I'm going to talk about is Miami University students from the South, from 1809 to 1864. This is using a software application that was authored by Dr. Offenberger in our history department. Over 3 semesters, undergraduates and some graduate students recovered 7,000 records of students, including state and hometown. The goal here was to provide quantitative data to support discussions about Miami University's dependence on tuition revenue from students from southern states prior to the Civil War, a fact which has circulated, including in the 2009 bicentennial book, but without real data to support it. It isn't yet public, but it is going to be offered on the Lived Experiences Race at Miami website in a year or two. This is what it looks like. These are some of the terms that you can search by, and we're going to look at those 57 entries. I made a mistake here. It's not really 57 students because students are here for more than 1 year, but 57 entries of students from Louisiana before 1864. And all you have to do is look at that and realize that some of these students were embedded in the cotton and slave industries of the South. Second project, just to sort of, these aren't even in chronological order of mine. The Veteran Stories Project, which was done with Alumni Association. Undergraduate students did research in the archives and wrote over 100 biographies of military veterans. This is a sort of landing page currently on the Alumni Association Veteran Tribute page. And this is an example of the kind of biographies. Ethel and Edith, unsurprisingly, were twins. They graduated from Miami and they served in the U.S. Army Nursing Corps during World War I. Another example was the African American Experiences at Miami Walking Tour. This uses the Clio.com mobile walking device. I did this so well and I didn't even look at it. It's accessible on Clio.com. Yeah, screwed up. And it was created during the pandemic, so the students really had to rely on digitized records. This is an open access format, so if you go to it and you're like, oh my gosh, you can send me corrections or changes and I just accept them and they show up on the actual walking tour. So it's a very flexible format. This is what it looks like. And this is one of the entries. One of the earliest projects I did was with Oxford Museum Association. Students researched individuals, and I put in here, buried in the cemetery by grave markers, because they were uninterested in doing non-grave markers people, but we used MU Archives for maps and other materials. This is the WordPress landing page designed by the students. And this is one of the entries for Samuel Doty. And you can see the students looking at grave markers in the background. That was like the highlight. I want to talk about a final project, Lived Experience, Race at Miami University. I was the person doing the archive work. I worked closely with Jackie Johnson, Aaliyah, and Tiffany Dogan, who was an administrative assistant here. One of the things we did, summer of 2022, was simply ask the question, what can we learn about African American experiences from the institutional records held at Miami University Archives, which is here in the special collections. I focused, and I had an undergraduate and a graduate researcher on the African American employees and students before 1965. I literally just wanted to create a database, which I have, that is not public yet because it's still being worked on. What we identified is over 10,000 pages that will be digitized and available on the Lived Experience website. These pages are related to African American faculty, students, and staff, mainly staff, and also to international student experiences. We identified over 240, it's now 250 because I've been working on it this fall, but we've identified over 240 African American employees of Miami University from 1900 to 1950. All of those individuals were residents of Oxford. And also, it becomes pretty clear as we begin to do this, the impact of the tuition waiver on some of those African American families. The tuition waiver was approved individually by the president, and as we can see here in this memo, this included people who had worked at Miami for years as a lunchroom attendant, whose children, nieces or nephews, one family member, could attend Miami with a tuition waiver. I also want to talk about a little bit about other things we found in the archives related to African American employees. This is a personal postcard to Wallace T. Raudebush from Dad Wolf, who went to Colorado with his wife. Dad Wolf was George Wolf. He was an employee of Miami for over 20 years, and as we see here, he did end up resigning because of heart troubles. There's a whole memo list here where he's writing notes about not feeling well. And here we have one of the handwritten memos, communication between he and Mr. Pryor, another African-American janitor, who were communicating to Mr. Raudebush about their duties. We also have early evidence of and Dr. Sutton mentioned, I think 1910 or 1912, but in 1911, Lulu Smith wrote to MU administrator about basically saying that they'd been discriminated against. And this was the teaching college in the summer that she's referring to, exactly, I know. So this is just a lot of material here that had not really been dealt with, but had been carefully preserved in the archives. I also want to talk really quickly, just as Dr. Norris did, about my favorite object. It's Vivian Chief Crawford's scrapbook. Vivian, as you can see, was sort of like a superstar student. He wasn't a great student, he was a great student, if that makes sense. He wasn't a great academic. Here's his scrapbook, probably bought up on High Street. And then here's why it's such a favorite of mine. All these little cutouts, he bought the yearbook. He probably had 2 copies, and then he made these. His future wife, Helen, is there, and then the beta boy heads floating around. Here's his football team. He was the chief. Again, there's lots of interesting stuff there about just how deeply felt were some of these Native American images. After he graduated, Vivian, along with basically the whole football team who graduated that year, joined the World War I effort. When he came back after 6 months, he and another friend did fundraising tours in Millville, Eaton, Camden, and Oxford, a lantern slide show. So, thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Nathan French. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Comparative Religion, at least for the next year or two while we still have a Department of Comparative Religion. This project, Weaving the Story, emerged really amid the pandemic. And I am speaking on behalf of a bunch of faculty, as you'll see in a moment, who aren't with us today, but I spoke with them, and I think they're all really, really glad to have this work brought out more in public. This project emerged in the pandemic amid a period of a feeling of intense loneliness and lack of community, which I think a lot of us can relate to from that time. And also a time for those of us that were a part of this effort that were in the humanities, a time when the pragmatic value of the humanities and the humanities as a valuable inquiry for undergrads is often under intense question and scrutiny. And so our goal here as part of this project was to begin to develop a way of speaking about Miami's history, its traditions, its folklore across the curriculum. So not just in a humanities classroom, not just in a history classroom. And the title of the project is Weaving the Story. And some may or may not be familiar with what that means that are here today or watching online. Every commencement, and sometimes during homecoming, which this is a fitting weekend for that conversation, Miami students, alumni, and faculty will stand and sing, or sometimes hum, sometimes look at each other and ask if they know the words. The alma mater, right? Old Miami, New Miami, days of old and days to be, weave the story of thy glory, our Miami here's to thee. And when my co-lead, Annie DeLorean, and I were talking about this project, we talked about it through the lens of asking questions of where we are in place. How many of us know the history of this song? What is the glory of which it speaks? What is old Miami? What is new Miami? Who determines what that glory will be? And as faculty, as students, as members of this community, what are our roles in the ongoing construction of this glory? And so this project really emerged out of a conversation that occurred in the Howe Writing Center's Leading Change Institute, hosted by Liz Wardle and Mandy Olenek, who have done terrific work over the years, bringing faculty in to teach about writing. And it also depends heavily on the work of Jackie Johnson and Leah Wegner, who helped us with the digital collections material. There were 9 faculty who ended up participating in this project. And when we worked on this through the Center for Teaching Excellence, we did so with an eye towards scholarship on teaching and learning. And one of the things we learned through that process is that any institution that is willing to invest in honest conversations on history, tradition, and culture, particularly through the lens of its archives, will actually improve student retention and student morale. It's an act of community building, it's an act of conversation building, and it reminds us of the stake that we play in these materials. So we came out of this project with conversations about how do we, regardless of discipline, training, or background, go to the university archive and learn ways of bringing those materials into our classes. And the projects we had were several. I'll highlight a few of them today. The ones that I won't be going into as in-depth, but I should mention Jason Palmieri's work, quote, Why I Dislike Men, The Politics of Gender in Mid-Century Composition Student Writing at Miami University. Some incredible poetry there that's based on an actual student line of poetry, the title. And then Cam Schreiber's Generations Questing from Thee, Exploring the Missionaries of Miami. I was hoping Cam might mention this today, but he's not going to. But I picked up on that research in my own classroom, where I have students in my Intro to the Study of Religion class look at the types of missionaries that Miami once understood itself to train, particularly in its heavy Presbyterian era. And then I had them ask what type of missionaries Miami might be trying to train today. Non-denominational, non-religious in many cases, but there are certain values that I think Miami hopes our students leave here with, and so it gives our students a chance to explore that. The projects that I want to draw our attention to here, Elena Jackson Alvaron's Miami and the World, the Miami University Doloboy European Center, is a deep look at the history of the campus in Luxembourg beginning in 1968. And part of this conversation, part of the archives that she looked at were both in the Walter Havighurst Special Collections. Others were actually in Luxembourg itself, and she worked with those with the permission of campus authorities there. But what we did is we set up a way for our students going to Lux to think about who they are participating in this Miami project abroad. One of the coolest things that she found were student narratives of when they were permitted to go to Moscow during the Cold War as part of a field trip. That was incredible. Then we have Annie DeLoria's Muralism in the Campus Community, the life of the Fullwider mural. Fullwider, sir, I good there? Yeah. Fullwider. This is a mural that I think is often seen in the margins on campus now, but at one point in time held a very central place on our campus that offered a narrative history of who we are and where we were going. And so in her case, she has her students imagine what was the story Miami told itself in this image, what were the sources of that story, and where is it going from here? Then we have Carrie Ann Sherritt, who joined us as a PhD candidate in biology. She explored deeply Miami and the land, the way in which Miamians have debated the environment, environmental issues and sustainability, and she did that alongside Stephanie Danker from Art History, who looked at histories of the trees of Miami and their role in how we imagine our campus history. And then in my own work, I've presented through the special collections on the 1969-1970 sort of pamphlet revolutionary period we called this on campus, Isabel Sestino and I. Here we looked at the role of the United Campus Ministry, which was once housed in the Old Manse as a site of some radical protest and pamphleteering on our campus. During the era, for those of you familiar with Miami's history, of the occupation of Rowan Hall, which is where Armstrong University Center sits now. It's one of the reasons why we still see anchors on that center's architecture, for those who walk by. Some of you may be asking, there are anchors on it? There are, and I'm happy to talk about those at a later point. So our goals, right? Our goals here come out of work, a commencement address from Wendell Berry, the noted Kentuckian author and poet. And he writes and talks about this idea of homecoming, and it's an idea we looked at in our work. He says, an education of homecoming must require an acceptance of locality as the context of study, thought, and work. This in turn will require humility, a virtue not often encouraged or esteemed by the modern arts and sciences, but a major in homecoming will not make us intellectual heroes. It will begin and end with a confession of ignorance. For we are all ignorant in varying degrees of where we are, of what we need to do to stay there, of what we need to do to assure that our children and grandchildren can stay there. So as we weave this story in an ongoing way, I consider Barry's questions of provocation that remains open to the work that we've been doing with the Havighurst Special Collections. First, what has happened here? And by here, we mean wherever we live and work. What should have happened here? What is here now? What is left of the original natural endowment of this place? What has been lost, and what have we added? What is the nature or the genius of this place? What will nature permit us to do here without permanent damage or loss? What will nature help us to do here? What can we do to mend the damages we have done? What are the limits of the nature of this place, of our intelligence and ability? And I'll add a ninth question: what role in the archive for helping us resolve or engage or confront those questions? Thanks.
My name is Cam Schreiber. I work in the Miami Center, and I want to say that I think my first time in an archive was probably James Stuckey helping me get a hold of Miami Center, the Miami collection. I was an undergraduate in 2008, I believe, so I was at another school. She helped me, and then, of course, this work that I'm going to discuss would only be possible with generous and, I think, to highlight the friendly atmosphere of this archive, which is not true of all or even most archives. So of course that generates more research, more questions, and more knowledge. So Jackie Johnson, Laura Wegner, and Bill Madro have all been particularly generous. And I became, when I was asked along with Bobby Burke to examine kind of what is the history of the relationship between the Miami tribe and Miami University, I became immediately fascinated with this sense that if this is the most beautiful campus that ever there was, where did the campus come from? What was here before that? And this story is really circular. I mean, the campus emerged from the land, literally, from the red bricks that came from the land, that were fashioned here. Financed by leasing the land to settlers. And so from its inception, this school was tasked with keeping records of land sales, essentially generating an archive from the very beginning. So before it's a university, Miami is really akin to a land company. Here's how it worked. So before the US had conquered this region, this guy from New Jersey named Sims had already bought and actually sold most of the area before it's conquered, before it's relinquished by treaty. It's all bought and sold. Part of the deal was that part of that land was going to be reserved to finance an academy for this new settler. So the endowment is the land. That's what it is, the original endowment. So the Miami University was financed as one township. This is the map of the Miami University. It's literally kind of physically a land, a territory. And the trustees were entrusted with leasing the land at the rate of 6% of the value of the purchase price. So it's like a 6% yearly tax going directly to the university trustees. These are on 99-year leases that could not be revaluated. So if I buy land for $1, every year I have to pay the university 6 cents for 99 years, and then they'll just automatically renew. This is the first one. So this is in the university archives. First sale here is today, now the corner of campus and High Streets. I mapped where are these lands being sold. So the very first one is right across from the slant block gates, which is now the Phi Delta Theta headquarters. And this source of revenue was the primary source of revenue, more than tuition, fees, donations. There is no state funding. The land is the primary source of revenue for the university, at least through the Civil War. Does anyone remember paying their rent to Miami University? Does anyone still pay their rent to Miami University? Yeah? Okay, yeah.
There are people who do.
Yeah, there are, yeah. Yeah. So by the 20th century, rent payments were relatively insignificant. I mean, if the value of the land in 1810 was $1 per acre, 6 cents per year is not worth it for the university to continue collecting. It's more an administrative cost than the university is gathering. Literally the height of university revenues would be about $7,500, which is a lot of money in 1810, not a lot of money in 1910. But again, the state said you can't revaluate. So this is where some people would have literally paid their rent. I think that's in Roundbush Hall. Thanks. Yep. Okay. So most people paid something like $1 every year. And the university, by the 1960s really, began to get out of the landlord business. It was no longer profitable. So they began discharging the liens in perpetuity for a small fee, releasing those liens. Often people remember that it was about $25 to pay so that the university now no longer has a claim on your land for the entire township. Again, not everyone has done this, and therefore some people continue to pay. Happily, I'm sure. In other words, the university, the school, had all but used up its financialized land by the time that the Miami Tribe came around in 1972. The land had, as a financial commodity, had largely run its course. Eugene Brown knew parts of this story. Tim Yodema is a Miami citizen, Miami elder, very well respected, who's passed on now. And he made a sculpture of Miami University, and this is what he imagined. When he was asked about it, Eugene Brown said, "I sat back and I thought, what is the sequence of the Miamis losing this Miami land?" So he created, in his own words, this is a historical document. A sandhill crane and loon curve toward the sky from the back of the turtle. Corn and cattails grow intertwined with them, and this turtle's back is etched with the seal of Miami University. Etched into the land. This is a removal story. Stuck at an angle into the turtle shell is a surveyor's stake. So Eugene Brown, got to meet him once, he's a real character. His mother had survived boarding school. She told him, when he asked about their language, he said, "Why don't you teach me the language?" She said, "It's because English is the only language that we'll need going forward. No reason to learn any of this Miami stuff." And as an elder, he talked about this at my university. This is Eugene Brown here in the University Art Museum. And he said the Indians were here first, and then the Europeans came in and they surveyed it. They drove down surveyor stakes. So conquest led to land, which led to the university, leading to archives about the land. It's this circular story, and it's all sitting there in the archives, or maybe better yet, all there right on the land itself now. Thank you.
Thank you, Cam. So I feel humbled appropriately by all of these wonderful projects that are underway now. But as a historian, I'm going to tell you some ancient history that ended in 2009. Okay? So let's get started. These images show you the only officially sanctioned published histories of Miami University up to the year 1998. So in Miami's first 85 years, classes began in 1824 up to 1909, there was no published history about the campus. And I think you've been hearing today how important it is to talk about your own history and your location and time and place. The first publication in 1909 was done by Alfred Upham, and he was president during the centennial of the university. Upham had been an English professor. He still was. His students had performed folklore stories about the history of the place as large theatrical productions held in front of today's alumni hall. And so in 1909, Upham, as part of the celebration of the centennial, decided to pull those stories together in a book he called Old Miami, Yale of the Early West. And it was the first official publication of Miami University. During the next 89 years, up to 1998, there would be 3 more Miami history publications. The second, published for the sesquicentennial in 1959 by Walter Havighurst. We haven't said a lot about Havighurst himself today. Havighurst described himself as a regionalist writer who drew upon the work of historians, but pieced it together like a novelist to tell a story that evoked a sense of place. That means he wasn't constrained by all of the facts, but he knew a lot of them. And he worked right here in the university archives, and he produced the first major publication in Miami years. As you can see, it went through several editions, but as early as 1958, in preparation for the sesquicentennial celebration in 1959. Why did he do that? Because President John Millett asked him to do it. President John Millett was a very aggressive president during the time when Miami was growing like crazy after after World War II. Change was everywhere. And Dr. Millett, being a clever guy, said, we need stories about Miami's past for the alums to read and for the staff to read, for everybody to read, so that they know this place has a really solid foundation, because as they look around them, they see a lot of wrecking balls and cranes and construction. He didn't say it exactly that way, but we believe that was in his mind, and he did a variety of projects, but one was to suggest that Walter Havighurst do this book. The book, by the way, was adapted by Professor Fulwider, whose picture you saw in Nagel's presentation, as a mural on the Heritage Center wall, where it stood for years as an evocation of Havighurst's story. Havighurst drew very heavily on Alfred Upham. All of the stories in Upham, not all of them, but most of them are reproduced in Havighurst's book. 25 years after 1959, we get a 4th history, which is published for the bicentennial. But before we get to that one, I direct your attention to Dr. Schreiber's personal history. Dr. Philip Schreiber, when I came to Miami, my orientation, he was standing in front of the mural telling the history of the university to every new faculty member who came into the university. And he did the same thing at summer orientation for every single student who entered the university for years and years. He was president for 17 years, and he did this even longer. He taught a very famous Miami history course. How many people here took that course? I did. I see. He had the personal magnetism He could read an aphorism from the McGuffey readers, and frat boys would sit in a hall. I couldn't believe it. So Shriver was great, and he really used history, I think, as part of this presidential motif to weave a story about what he called the Miami family. Well, in 1998, Dr. William Pratt, who was honored earlier in relation to these archives, he pulled together the videotapes of Dr. Shriver's last year as a lecturer in his Miami history course, edited those, and published them as Miami University of Personal History. So we did have a third history book in 1998. But if you go back to Havighurst's book, which is much more, I think all parties, including Dr. Shriver, would say much more substantial. Well, 25 years later, we were coming up on the university's bicentennial. And so a large committee, chaired some of the time by Jerome, decided we've got to have a new history of the institution. And so that's what I'm going to talk about here next. That's a picture of it. And just to prove that it weighs a lot, this is the book itself. And it's got lots of pictures, and sort of looks like it came out in three different editions, one a bound, boxed version, so it can be a picture book. But I want to assure you that the people who wrote it were not thinking of it as a coffee table picture book. There were 57 contributors to this work, 8 of them writers who were not of white heritage, 11 of them women. All were invited and given a contract to write about a particular feature of Miami history in which they had either shown an interest or about which they had a great deal of expertise. And they did that. Every single person accepted the invitation. They all produced their work on time. And then this wonderful committee, which I'll describe in just a moment, went through that work, and we put together what's called an edited history. But we were doing something. Remember old Miami, Yale of the early West? Okay? Remember in the earlier presentation, old Miami, new Miami? Weave the story of thy glory, our Miami, here's to thee. This group of people were professional historians of one kind or another, and we sat and we talked and we asked questions like, in 200, if we were 50 years from now and somebody looked back to say, what is it that Miami achieved most vividly in its first 200 years, what would that be? And what needs to be in the story that does not appear in Walter Havighurst's book? Well, right away, they said, there are not 2 eras of Miami University. There are 5, okay? There are 5 different eras, and we'll turn to those in a moment. But how did we get that idea? Because all of the people who were invited to write for this book, many of them working in the archives or special collections to produce their work, brought us information that at that time we had about experiences of African Americans at Miami and in Oxford, the impact of women students and staff on campus life after 1900, the influence of Oxford's 3 women's colleges on residential life at Miami, very profound, the importance of professional schools after World War II, the relationship of Miami to the Miami tribe, especially after the 1970s, which is a topic maybe we can elaborate a little more in the Q&A. The 200-year evolution of Oxford as a true college town. Some of you know the director of McGuffey Museum, Steve Gordon, and he's studying whether or not Oxford is really a kind of a unique college town. You heard one side of it in Cam's presentation, but another side of it is if you're isolated residential and you're here for 200 years, that affects the character of the institution very deeply. Well, we won't go into that here, it's in the book. And finally, the dramatic expansion of Miami's built environment after World War II. If you look at all those things, you come up with something a little different than Old Miami, New Miami. This is a kind of composite title page from the book. It shows you that it was published by Ohio University Press in association with Miami in 2009 for the bicentennial. But we looked at 5 different eras. The first, we said, yes, it's Old Miami, the period of inventing college life as we know it in Miami, and it lasted until 1885. Miami closed regular classes after the financial panic of 1872, and then it reopened in 1885, regular classes. Never closed, it just changed its character, and we can talk about that too. But up to 1885, it was one kind of place. We call New Miami 1885 to 1941, when the campus embraced professional schools. The critical story is the arrival of the Ohio State Normal College, today's School of Education, Health and Community. Did I get close to right?
Health and Society.
Health and Society, thank you. The Ohio State Normal College was created at Miami and at Ohio University to train teachers to go into the public schools. And in the book you can see a wonderful little exhibit that says, come to Miami, free tuition if you become a teacher, okay? Well, the Ohio State Normal College brought money to the university. It also brought what? Women, because women went into the teaching profession. And as I used to tell my students, there's a wonderful graph in student enrollment in the back of this book, which I hope you'll look at someday. And when you see the rise in total enrollment, I said, well, the women came, and for some reason, more men came. They could never tell me why that was. Okay, so that's a New Miami. It's about professionalism. But we say it came to an end. It came to an end with World War II. And from 1941 to 1970, the agendas of the institution changed significantly enough so that the idea was we're expanding access. And some of you know, and I'm sure actually most of you know, the campus that we see today is not the campus that people would have experienced prior to World War II. The campus most people know of as the 200-year-old campus is a post-World War II construction, and it had a creator, and his name was Charles Solarius, who designed and built over 40, count them, 40 buildings at Miami in the Neo-Georgian style. And so that post-war campus and the growth of the National University is the story of that third era up to 1970. Why did it stop in 1970? Well, Nathan mentioned the pamphlets, but there was more than pamphlets going on in Miami. In fact, Miami closed for a few days after Rowan Hall was captured by people protesting the Vietnam War, many of whom were arrested. That's another story, but it marked a turning point in the character of the institution, because when it came back, there was much more effort to cultivate the image of the university and to bring students into the workings of the institution. It's a rather dramatic shift. So we call that era the Public Ivy because it was so named by a journalist from Indiana in a book called The Public Ivy. He picked 12 as public institutions that he said had a kind of Ivy League character, and we were among them. So we had that period of the Public Ivy, and then, alas, we think it came to an end also. In the mid-1990s, we say the education marketplace changed, and the institution responded in kind. So external forces shifted the character of what the institution had to do, and we tell that story too. So, what were we trying to do in this book? Broaden its story, broaden the story of Miami, lay it out in such a way that people can understand historical change happens even to historians and those of us who live and work here. And the fine people who did this are listed here. The associate editors were Andrew Caton, Kate Rumanier, Robert Wicks, and Peter Williams. The illustrations editor was Bob Wicks, who was with the Art Museum for many years, and there are lots of illustrations in this book. In this picture, up in the right-hand side, can you tell me who that is? That is the beloved Bob Smith. Robert Schmidt was the university archivist. The archives were at that time were in over in Withrow Court. He became the archives editor for the book, and so this book had a direct connection to the staff of the archives. And our assistant editor, who was hired to work on this book, is right here in the room, Valerie Elliott, who directed the oral history project that was part of this project and worked with Bob to assist. That's really all I have to say about that book, but I'm going to tell one story just because I pestered some people about keeping time, and they were so good that I get an extra 2 minutes. So the first course I ever taught on institutional history was about the history of Western College for women. It was a junior seminar in the Western College, and in that class we sent the students down to the archives to do projects related to original documents that they found there about Western and its relation to Miami. One of the books that I showed you here, and I don't recall if it was Dr. Havighurst's book or Dr. Shriver's book, but the students were reading those books in class, as well as some Western histories like Narka Nelson's, a very good Western College for Women. So the student had a project, and she proposed it, and we said, yeah, that's a good hypothesis, go down and look at it, look for it. So she went down and she found that she went to see Bob, and if you remember Bob, he said, Professor Ellison says you might have some things on this topic. Do you have anything I could read? And you know, Bob, he'd say, well, and he'd go away. In a few minutes he came back and he had like 4 boxes of material. So she set about reading through all of this stuff. And when she was done, she came back to see me. And she said, this project is not going to work. And I said, what's the problem? She said, well, I've read about this topic in this book here, and I've gone down there and I've looked at the documents, and I can't find what I'm looking for that's described in this book. And I said, well, why don't you go back and look some more? So she went back, and Bob produced even more boxes, and she went through all of those. And she came back and said, I don't know what I'm going to do. This project is a failure. And I said, well, tell me what's happened. She said, well, I read this, and it says this, but I've got these documents here that don't show that. And I said, has it ever occurred to you that you might be right and they might be wrong? And she said, oh. And in that little utterance, in my world, is the meaning of liberal education. Discovering that you can take control of your own personal understanding and growth by searching with original sources and putting them together in context. And I think that all of these projects we've heard today do that richly in one way or another, and I want to thank everybody for their presentation, and we will stop here, and I think there's a little time for Bill to take questions if you'd like to have them. Thank you.
Questions? Comments? Suggestions?
Can you hear me?
Expressions of outrage.
If a history of Miami University was written today, what do you think would be included that hasn't been in the other books?
A lot of what we've been seeing in these projects, indeed. I've been sort of a backbench advisor to the Lived Experiences project which means I mostly get to watch what all these wonderful people are doing. And I'm telling you, that project knocks your socks off. Go to the website and see what they have found. It is amazing to me. And every time I look at that, or every time I hear what Nathan and his people are doing, and what Cam's doing, I mean, Cam, if we were to rewrite the first chapter of the Miami history book, Cam Shriver's research that you heard about would change the narrative already, okay? That's a nice thing about history. It's always changing because we learn new things, we discover new facts, and bright people come along and ask a different question. And that's what happens. So those are examples, and there are probably others. Helen?
Well, I was gonna say also, Dr. Sutton's students' work being included in the archives then creates, right? Like that then continues it, because we've had students working with material that students from the 1940s and 1950s created. And so I just think that there's also that way that professors and their students are contributing to the archives by showing the work that the archives does in the classroom, but also then adding to that historical narrative. And frankly, I was like crying over here during your presentation, because those are really deeply historical contributions to the narrative. So that was my
One of the ways
thank you to Jeff.
One of the ways this book works is that there's a narrative, there's a lot of illustrations, but then periodically the narrative's interrupted for a particular deep dive or something. And if we were doing this today, several of the projects, yours included, would be invited to appear in the book as an illustration of what we were trying to say about connections with the community. Yeah.
I'll add to that too.
Go ahead.
I have to stand right. I would say, yeah, I think this is all this is exactly right. When we started this project in the pandemic, I knew that you were teaching about Miami history, and I knew that you've done some work on Miami history, but seeing faculty do levels of your work, we didn't see. So it's really cool to see that starting to emerge now out of the last 3 to 4 years, I guess. In terms of the periodization of the university, I don't think we're in the corporate university phase anymore. As a member of a program, one of the Low and Road programs, and being very much part of these conversations about the future of not just the humanities, but other programs here, on some level it feels like we're living, but Miami has always been part of the national conversation on what American higher education is. And we're living through that moment right now. As student enrollment shifts, as public trust erodes generally in higher education, we really, as faculty, students, and members of this community, find ourselves trying to rethink what Miami is. And I've jokingly told colleagues sometimes I feel like we're now a public MIT, meaning that we are really emphasizing business and tech and healthcare, and there are very real reasons for that, but it's forcing very real conversations in the humanities and social sciences about what we do here. And the archive, I think, has really been helpful, at least for our department in comparative religion, to think about the role that religion has played in Miami's history and what we're going to do moving forward in this new climate. So, yeah, only half joking on public MIT. Someone wants to write that, please do.
I get that. There's a question over here.
First of all, I wanted to say how fascinating this afternoon was, and I wanted to thank you. Actually, my question relates to Dr. French's question. Do you have a name for the current era of Miami University?
Well, I don't, because I retired here in the corporate. Nathan didn't tell us his new name, but I'm sure there will be one. The one thing that's for certain about historical change is that it keeps on happening.
Okay, well, no. So, I have some thoughts, but I mean, one thing we could say is are we becoming a post-liberal arts institution? I don't know. If I were to be optimistic about this era, I would call it, in a sense, a Miami Renaissance, because it is a sort of rebirth. Now, that's a real challenge, because it's become a lot of new things in that moment. But the work that our colleagues are doing, the fact that even in partnership with the city, we have a monument uptown that talks about a really grim chapter in our city's history, the fact that that's there and open and public, and we can talk about the role of Miami in that period of Oxford history, I think is really important, and it's shifting the way we think about ourselves as an institution in very responsible ways. So if I want to be optimistic, I'd call it a renaissance. But the public MIT will be in there somewhere.
Yeah, when I was at, some of you know I was at the Western College for many, many years. And I thought the genius of that program, and I do think it was a genius, was about half of the curriculum was a true core curriculum that covered a wide range of humanities, social sciences, and arts, and quantitative reasoning, and just basic skills in courses that were designed around problems that students could get engaged with. But the other half of the curriculum that students went through was to pick and choose courses from throughout the disciplines of the institution so that they could burrow down. And I frequently called that, over the 17 years I was dean, I called it applied liberal arts. We had a College of Arts and Science doing all sorts of other things, but we were in that program, a sort of applied liberal arts. So the idea of being an MIT-style institution is not a new one here. And you could say that that started happening when the School of Education was created as well. But I do think this, all of these rich things we've heard today, and I thank you for your compliment because I agree with you, this is a great program. All of those things are important. I mean, you know, my little story, which I overtold about the student who discovered thinking, you know. I have an experience like that as an undergraduate. I came out of the building one day and I looked around because I had just been introduced to Frank Lloyd Wright, and I said, oh my God, I live in architecture. It didn't have to be this way. Somebody designed it. I remember that day very vividly. And that's what I'm talking about. This kind of stuff, hands-on in the archives, thinking about questions that the humanistic disciplines can provide and the artistic disciplines can provide, that helps you discover how to think. And that's what, in the long run, is going to help, in my view, your lifelong satisfaction and your productivity.
If I
So
say,
I'm optimistic.
Miami, new stories being told.
So once again, we want to thank you all very much for coming out this afternoon. We have two more very quick things, and we will have you out in 5 minutes, I promise you, by 5 o'clock, as promised. One is that the provost is with us today. We're very honored to have Provost Molinex. Liz, as many of you know, is a theater historian, so she loves the humanities, knows the humanities, appreciates the humanities, but at the same time, she is, I think, the right person for the right time in this chapter of Miami's history, and is a good friend of the library, and she wants to share just a little bit about her experience with special collections, and then we'll have another presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Dean Connolly. It's wonderful to be here today. I'm a big fan of special collections, which I feel are special indeed. It's really one of my favorite places at Miami, one of the most important things, and I was a little late today to this amazing presentation because I was asked by a Miami faculty member who is a Latin American Studies faculty member to go to a play that was at the Oxford Community Arts Center. And it was terrific. They did a great job. But featured so prominently in her biography is research that she's done here on Rodolfo Usigli, who is who is sort of the father of modern Mexican theater. And I just know, and so boom, this afternoon, saw the power of the special collections in the lives of one of our faculty members who can do her research right here, right? Which is another really important thing. So impacts our faculty researchers. I know that I have used the special collections as a scholar for my own work, and regularly used it as a professor. So even though I've been at Miami for 18 years and I have always been an administrator, but I've always continued to teach, which is my only true superpower, I think. And so I'll tell you a quick story about that. So I always brought students to special collections to see various things. We have, for example, the largest collection of plays by Native American women playwrights, the Napa collection. We had a whole conference on that several years ago, which was really exciting. But I've brought my students to see all kinds of things at special collections throughout the years. And last winter, so my first year as provost, I was teaching a class. I had the wonderful honor of being able to teach a class in London, theater for my students. And we were at the Globe one afternoon seeing Henry V in their indoor space. And there's one of Shakespeare's folios under glass. And my students freaked out. They were so excited by seeing the artifact, right? Something that, unfortunately, Shakespeare was deceased when the folio was assembled in 1623, and he died in 1616. But they had been to Stratford and gone to all his houses, and they had been seeing Shakespeare all over London, performed by the best actors of Shakespeare, of course. And they saw the actual folio under glass. And they gathered around and they wanted a picture with it. And I said, you guys, we have one at Miami. And they couldn't believe it. And I told them that I had taken my other classes to go. This was a winter term class, so they were flying to London from all places that they lived, and we didn't get to do that before they left. But I will never forget watching one of my students who went on to be a graduate student in history, actually, not theater history, but history. And is working towards his PhD, but the moment that they were allowed to touch it, right? So it came
here,
out
not in London.
here, right? I mean, yeah, they didn't break the glass, it's story. But they brought it out, the special collections librarian, and they couldn't believe it. I mean, they had such a profound experience actually seeing, you know, one of Shakespeare's folios, so rare, and the fact that it was right here at Miami. Just, it was something, I promise. You know, you wonder, do college students remember an experience in the archive for the rest of their life? But this one, they absolutely did. And it's just, so I witnessed firsthand the kind of power that this special collections has and the impact it makes on a student's life. And so, just a big, so I celebrate with you. What a wonderful, wonderful aspect of Miami and its history. So congratulations to everyone. Yeah.
So one of the things that I have the pleasure of being as the dean is I don't have a certain committee at times when I want to give a Distinguished Service Award. I can do it myself by proclamation or feel like I'm the mayor again, like I proclaim this. Kurt Ellison shared with us today a journey that he took us on during the bicentennial, and he was the original chair of that committee. And what he did was something that I think in 50 years and 100 years, people will look back on and say thank you, because he captured a part of Miami's history that hadn't been told. Women, people of color, the essence of what has made this university special. And when Dr. Shoemaker was sharing this story for the first time about the number of African Americans who worked at Miami University in the early 20th century, I had no idea that there were over 250, we now know, between 1900 and 1950. Just think about that. Where is that chronicle? Where is that captured in the histories that we've read over time? And I think that that's what makes me so excited about being the dean at this moment. Because I have about 100 individuals who each day come in to make sure and to ensure that the students, the researchers, the faculty, and the staff have access to the information that they need, regardless of the station in life that they walk. And when we as a university, when we as a country, when we as a nation no longer appreciate the value of that history, when we want to destroy that history, as Masha was sharing with us earlier when Stalin came in. As I said last month, the world begins to disintegrate. And I am very happy to be part of a community and to lead a community that has some kind of vision that we're going to do our part to make this place better during our station in life here at Miami University. And what I think Kirk's history has done is help to capture that. So we have this plaque that was started by my predecessor, Judith Sessions, and we're going to add Kirk's list of names to the list of special friends of the Miami University Libraries. So thank you, Kirk, for And there's also a very special group of people that we're going to honor as well this evening very quickly. I've been the dean for 10 years, and during my chapter of Miami Library's history, I've had an advisory board, alumni advisory board, who has been with me throughout this chapter. And we are going to add their names to this list as well. So we have Carolyn Walter, we have Judy Mansfield, we have Connie and Pat Sidley. We have 2 new members, Ron and Kush Pittenger, who are going to join us tomorrow. We have Jed Grisey, and we have Bradley Masco, as well as Janet Tolbert. So we thank them for their commitment to Miami as alumni to this university. So give them a round of applause. I shared with you the goals that we had for the past 2 months as we celebrated the 50th year of the naming of the Havighurst Special Collections. And I hope that we accomplish those goals. This will conclude this event, but we do hope that you will take part in discussions with the speakers, presenters today, and partake in the refreshments that we have out front. So thank you all very much, and may you have